Dr. Lily Carter had worked in hospitals for years, but there was something about the old saint, Mary's hospital, that always made her uneasy. It was one of those buildings that seemed to have a life of its own, with creaking floors, flickering lights, and long dark hallways that always felt colder than they should. The hospital had been built in the early 1900s and had seen its fair share of tragedy. Whispers of strange occurrences and eerie happenings had circulated among the staff, but most dismissed it as mere superstition. Tonight, Lily was assigned to the late shift in the psychiatric ward, a part of the hospital that was rarely used anymore. The ward had been shut down several years ago due to its deteriorating condition, but some patients still remained, those who were too difficult to transfer to other facilities. The hospital had a strict policy of maintaining only a skeleton crew in this part of the building, and tonight, Lily was the only doctor on duty. She walked down the long corridor of the ward, her footsteps echoing off the walls. The overhead lights buzzed, flickering intermittently, casting strange shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally. She checked the patient records as she walked, mentally preparing herself for the long night ahead. There were only 5 patients on the ward tonight, each in different stages of recovery, or in some cases, decline. As Lily approached the first room, she paused. The door was slightly ajar, and she could hear muffled voices. She pushed the door open, her heart beating a little faster than usual. Inside, the room was dark, but she could make out the shape of a patient sitting in the corner, rocking back and forth. The patient, a middle-aged man named Mr. Johnson, was known for his violent outbursts, but tonight he seemed strangely calm. "Mr. Johnson?" Lily said softly, stepping into the room. The man didn't respond. He continued to rock back and forth, his murmurs growing louder. "Mr. Johnson, can you hear me?" she asked again, this time stepping closer. Suddenly, he stopped rocking and turned to face her. His eyes were wide, unnaturally wide, and his mouth stretched into a twisted grin. "She's here," he whispered. "The one in the shadows. She's waiting for you." Lily felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She took a cautious step back. "What do you mean, Mr. Johnson?" The man's grin faded, replaced by a look of sheer terror. "Don't go down to the basement," he rasped. "She lives there. She's waiting for you." Before Lily could respond, the man's body stiffened, and he collapsed forward onto the floor. Panicked, she rushed to his side, checking his pulse. It was faint, but still there. He had passed out, but what had he meant? Who was in the basement? She called for assistance, but the hospital's radio crackled with static. No one answered. The silence in the ward seemed to grow thicker. Lily's hands trembled as she adjusted the patient's position, but her mind kept drifting back to Mr. Johnson's warning. The basement. Against her better judgment, she decided to investigate. She had to know what Mr. Johnson was talking about. The hospital's basement had been off limits for years. It was said to be unsafe, with old equipment and abandoned rooms full of forgotten records. There had been whispers of strange occurrences down there too, but no one dared go near it. Lily made her way down the hall, her footsteps growing louder in the silence. The air felt heavier the closer she got to the basement door, and she could feel a strange presence, like someone, or something, was watching her. The hair on the back of her neck stood up, but she pushed forward. Her curiosity was stronger than her fear. She reached the stairs that led down into the darkness, her breath shallow. With a deep breath, she descended into the basement. The cold air hit her immediately, and the smell of mildew and decay filled her nostrils. Her flashlight barely pierced the darkness, casting weak beams of light across the concrete walls. As she moved deeper into the basement, she saw old hospital equipment, forgotten and covered in dust. But there was something more. A faint sound, almost imperceptible, echoed through the darkness. It was a soft tapping like fingernails on glass. Lily's heart raced as she followed the sound, her footsteps now echoing louder than before. Then she saw it. A door, partially open, stood at the far end of the basement. It was an old wooden door weathered by time and neglect. The tapping sound was coming from inside. Lily approached slowly, her hand shaking as she reached for the doorknob. The moment her fingers touched it, the door creaked open on its own, revealing a small, dimly lit room. Inside, sitting in the corner, was a figure. A woman, her face obscured by long, tangled hair, was rocking back and forth just like Mr. Johnson had. Her hands were clasped together, her nails scraping against the floor in a rhythmic pattern. The sound of her nails scraping was now unmistakable, and it sent a jolt of terror through Lily's body. Who are you?" Lily whispered, her voice trembling. Her flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows across the room, but the woman's face remained hidden. The woman stopped rocking and slowly turned her head toward Lily. Her eyes were black, empty voids, and her lips curled into a grotesque, silent scream. The room grew colder, and Lily's breath became visible in the air. The lights above flickered violently, casting sporadic flashes of light that only intensified the woman's terrifying presence. Lily felt paralyzed. Her legs refused to move, her mind racing with questions. Who was this woman? Why was she down here? What had Mr. Johnson meant? And why was she being drawn closer before Lily could react? A cold, invisible force slammed into her chest, pushing her back into the wall. She gasped for air, her vision blurring as the woman's figure loomed closer, her eyes never leaving Lily's face. The woman's voice, like a whisper from the depths of the earth, reached her ears. "You shouldn't have come." Lily's heart hammered in her chest as she struggled to breathe, her body unable to move. The force pressing against her chest was suffocating, but she couldn't break free. She tried to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. The woman's twisted form was now inches from her face, and Lily could feel the coldness emanating from her. "You are mine now," the woman whispered, her breath cold against Lily's skin. In that moment, everything went black. Dr. Anna Williams had always prided herself on her ability to handle any situation. As a senior resident at Crestview General Hospital, she had seen her fair share of strange and difficult cases. But tonight, something felt different. Something was off. The hospital was quieter than usual, its old, creaking halls echoing with an eerie silence. She had worked the late shift countless times before, but tonight, the darkness felt heavier. Crestview was one of the oldest hospitals in the city, dating back to the late 1800s. Over the years, several floors had been shut down due to structural issues. There were countless rumors about the hospital's history. Stories of mysterious disappearances, ghostly apparitions, and strange occurrences in its forgotten corners. Most of the staff dismissed them as mere folklore. Anna had never believed in such things. But tonight, something was different. As she walked down the long, dimly lit hallways, her footsteps echoed against the cold tile floors. The usual hum of activity was absent. The hospital was nearly empty, with only a few patients and staff remaining. She checked the night's patient logs. No emergencies scheduled. Yet an odd feeling lingered, like someone was watching her from the shadows. Her shift was supposed to be routine, but as she prepared to check on the last few patients, she received an unusual request from the front desk. A patient on the abandoned fourth floor had specifically asked for her. The journey to the fourth floor. Anna frowned. The fourth floor had been closed for years. The rooms were outdated, the equipment broken, and the entire level had been deemed unsafe. No one went up there anymore. Curious but uneasy, she made her way to the elevator. The doors opened with a soft ding, and she stepped inside. The air felt stale, as if it hadn't been disturbed in years. The overhead light flickered erratically. When the doors opened, she was met with a long, dark hallway that looked like it hadn't seen the light of day in decades. The walls were cracked and peeling, the once white floor tiles faded to a sickly gray. A faint whisper echoed from somewhere deeper inside. Anna hesitated, her pulse quickening. The silence was unsettling. The only sound was the soft shuffle of her shoes against the floor. She glanced around, wondering who could possibly be waiting for her here. A sudden chill ran through the hallway, causing her to shiver. She pulled her coat tighter and continued walking. The hallway stretched endlessly before her, the darkness pressing in from all sides. Finally, she reached the room. The door at the end of the hall stood slightly ajar. Anna took a deep breath and stepped inside. The mysterious patient. The room was dark except for a single, flickering light above. The air felt thick and suffocating, heavy with an unsettling presence. In the far corner sat a man. He appeared to be in his late 50s, his gray hair unkempt, his face sunken and pale. He sat perfectly still, his back facing her. Anna hesitated before speaking. "Mr. Thompson?" No response. She could hear his breathing, shallow, ragged. Something was wrong. "Mr. Thompson?" She tried again, stepping closer. Slowly, the man turned his head. His eyes were wide and unblinking, dark circles beneath them. His lips trembled as though he wanted to speak but couldn't. Finally, he whispered, "She's here. She's come for me." Anna's stomach dropped. "Who?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. His gaze locked onto hers, wild and desperate. "The woman. She's in the walls. She's waiting for me. Waiting for us." A chill crawled up Anna's spine. The temperature in the room plummeted, and cold sweat formed on her forehead. The whispers grew louder, now clearly audible, murmuring from behind the walls. "Stay away," Mr. Thompson muttered hoarsely. "You don't know what she can do." A terrifying presence. Before Anna could react, the overhead light flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. Her heart pounded. The whispers were growing, closer, clearer. The air was freezing, her breath visible in the cold. Then, in the darkness, a figure emerged, tall and thin, barely visible in the dim light. Anna stood frozen. The cold intensified, as if she had been submerged in ice water. The figure stepped closer, and Anna could make out its face, pale and distorted, hollow eyes staring right at her. A twisted smile stretched across its face. It was a woman. A cold hand clamped onto her arm. Anna screamed. She tried to pull away, but the grip tightened. Ice spread through her veins, paralyzing her body. "You shouldn't have come," the woman whispered. A desperate escape. Summoning every ounce of strength, Anna wrenched herself free and stumbled backward. She had to get out. She turned and ran toward the door, but the hallway had changed. No end in sight, just an endless corridor of darkness. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she turned back. The woman was still there, watching, her twisted smile widening. Anna sprinted, her footsteps pounding against the floor. But no matter how far she ran, she always ended up back at the same room. Then, ding! The elevator. It was open. She didn't hesitate. She threw herself inside and slammed the button for the ground floor. The doors closed. Trapped forever. Anna collapsed against the wall, gasping. The whispers had stopped. The cold was fading, but something was wrong. The doors slid open. She stepped out into the hospital lobby. Empty, completely deserted. Her stomach twisted in confusion. Where was everyone? Then a familiar voice. "You can never leave. You are one of us now." The elevator doors slammed shut behind her. Anna turned to press the button, but the display no longer showed the ground floor. It showed 4. The elevator was rising, back to the 4th floor, back to her. And this time, Anna knew she would never leave.